Good morning on this wonderful sunny day. I'm here with my two wonderful children, Senor Buendia and Peligro. They're here to help me broadcast this lesson to you. I had actually gone through and filmed this entire thing yesterday, all four parts. And I had done it in one video, and apparently it only saved 3 minutes of it. So I'm starting over on take two, right? Take two, and probably for your benefit, because I'm just going to make 4 separate videos for each of the separate parts. So what I'm presenting to you here today is an overview of World War I. Based on your reading, to hopefully help you clarify some understandings that may have been a little bit unclear to you in your independent reading, present you with another media, right, instead of reading and presenting you with a video and some notes. Just another way to help deepen your understanding, clarify your understanding, build on your understanding, so on and so on. So I won't waste any more of your time. I'll go through. The notes that I'm about to show you are going to be posted online. And along with this video, hopefully will help you to understand what we're doing. All right, so on with it then. All right, so World War I, you read about it. You read 3 things about it so far. You read about the causes of World War I. You read about the nature of the combat in World War I. You read about the concept of total war that was employed during the war. There is a 4th part to these notes that's going to cover the 4th part of our study, which we have not yet done, which will be the peace agreements that ended the war. We will not have a reading on them because I'm going to be presenting to you on those peace agreements here in this video series and in the notes that I'm going to provide to you, and we will instead be using the subject of those peace agreements to kind of wrap up World War I with an assessment, right? Our final assessment for the World War I unit will be relating to those peace agreements. So we'll get to that in a little bit. All right, so on to our notes here. As an overview, right, this kind of sums up what each of the 4 sections are going to be about. World War I was fought between 1914 and 1918, with the peace agreements being finalized in 1919. The fighting stopped on November 11th, 1918, so that didn't leave a whole lot of time for the peace agreements to get settled. So they got settled in 1919. And I think one of them in actually 1920. The war was caused by a variety of factors, some of which had been building up for the better part of 100 years. But there was, after all of those long-term effects had kind of developed and become more and more problematic over time, there was one event, the assassination of the Archduke, which ended up really starting the war. So there's the combination of the long-term causes and the single short-term cause that led to World War I. The fighting itself during World War I changed quite a bit from wars past. With World War I coming in, there's a lot of new technology that had been developed, but they were being used with old military strategies. So you have this combination of new technology like machine guns and airplanes and chemical gases and barbed wire being used with strategies from 100 years past, right? And the result was not good for the people involved in the fighting. To that effect, right, to buy this new technology and to support a war that was using new technology, such as the ones I just mentioned, you needed a lot of money, you needed a lot of support, and in order to do that, you really needed to employ your entire population towards supporting the war effort. And that's one aspect of what was called total war, right? The government of your country using every single available resource, human resource and material resource to support the war. And on the other side of that, your enemy nations are going to be targeting your non-soldiers, your civilian population, as a way to stop them from supporting your soldiers, right? This was a war that involved everyone being involved in supporting it, whether you were a soldier or a worker, and it was a war which involved being targeted, whether you were a soldier or a worker, right? And that's what we mean by total war. And when the war ended, it was a very complicated peace process that resulted in a very flawed peace agreement, one that made very few people happy at the time, and one which had major consequences for the future, which we'll see bear out over time, right? So on then to the first of the 4 sections of this lecture, which is going to be the causes of the war, all right? So on to the causes. As we had said before, there are a number of long-term causes, which we can see listed over here, and which I will go into detail about in the next few minutes. And ultimately, we'll reach the one single event which truly sparked the war, right? While all these other things made the nations involved in the conflict angry at one another, it is this that ultimately ends up being the cause of the fighting, the thing that actually gets the guns to be firing. So we'll be going more or less in order of this, right? And ultimately discussing this in this video, in this first part here, right? So the first of the long-term causes that I had listed was nationalism. Nationalism had been an ideology that had been in development for quite some time. Most people trace European nationalism back to the age of Napoleon. People started to believe in nationalism as a response to Napoleon because they were mad that he had conquered basically the entire continent of Europe. But before we go into how nationalism actually appeared in Europe, we need to define what it is, because it's not something I think that is, when you see the word, I don't think it is exactly what you would think it is. Specifically because the word nation, I don't think is what you think it is, at least not at first glance. I at least, when I was a history student in high school, did not fully understand it until it was explained to me. And the main confusion seems to be that many people think that the word nation means country, that they're synonyms, that they mean the same thing, and that is actually not true. The word nation comes from the Latin word natio, meaning birth. If you think about words that also come from that original word natio, like nativity, right? Nativity scene around Christmas where you see, like, you know, baby Jesus was born and stuff like that. In Spanish, the word to be born is nació, right? Which comes from this Latin word as well. So the word nation actually means birth. It doesn't have anything to do with country. So when we actually take that word and turn it into the word nation, what that means then, it's not a country. A nation is actually a group of people, right? It's not a political word. It's a social word. A nation is a group of people who share common history, culture, language, area in which they live, so on and so on. And they don't necessarily have to be all part of the same country, right? They don't have to be ruled by the same government. That's kind of what makes things a little bit unclear. So I give a useful example here that a nation, or an example of a nation, might be a Native American tribe, right? I like that example because it shows that a nation doesn't have to be a country, right? Native American tribes, each of the unique tribes in the United States, have their own language, their own unique history, their own ethnic characteristics, which they share with one another. And yet they are all part of the United States. They are controlled by the United States government. You know, unfortunately for them, whether they like it or not, they don't have too much of a choice in that unless they fight back. Nationalism then, getting on to what this actually is. Nationalism is the belief that your nation, your race of people has the right to rule itself, right? Now, see, nationalism is a political belief, right? Because it's saying that your specific group of people, the people who share your ethnic characteristics, your culture, language, religion, heritage, so on and so on, that they should be ruled by themselves, right? So, for example, if we take an example of a Native American tribe, let's say the Navajo, right? If the Navajo believed that they should rule themselves, that the Navajo should rule the Navajo, and not the United States government, that would be the idea of a nationalist idea, right? Believing that they have the right to rule themselves because they understand themselves, they would feel unfairly treated if someone else was ruling them, right? That's nationalism. So in the end, the goal of nationalism is to create a nation state. That is a political idea. A nation that rules itself, a nation that has a government made up of its own people is called a nation state. So an example of a nation state today, let's just say Japan, right? Japan is an example of a nation state because in Japan, you have a government controlled by the Japanese people ruling over a country where the vast majority of the people are Japanese. The Japanese, because of their immigration policies, they don't really let too many non-Japanese people into their country. So Japan is truly a nation state. The vast majority of the people that live within the borders of Japan are Japanese, and the government of those people are Japanese, right? The opposite of a nation state then is an empire, right? Where a nation state rules over its own people and its own people only. An empire is when one specific group of people rules over many different groups of people, when one nation controls a territory that includes many other nations. So that would be the opposite of a nation state. And we'll see that these two, as you might predict, empires and nations, are going to come into conflict with one another because nations don't want to be ruled by empires.